So for this question, we're told, given that sine inverse x and cos inverse x are acute, show that sine of sine inverse x minus cos inverse x equals 2x squared minus 1. So that comes down to, well, how well you know what these things represent. So before we launch into the algebra, let's think of what we're trying to do, right? Remember, when it comes to trigonometric ratios, be it sine, cosine, tangent, or their reciprocals, you're always taking sine, cosine, or tangent of an angle. And at the end of the day, you're going to get a number. So for example, sine 30 is a half, sine 60 is root 3 over 2, tan of 45 is 1. They're just numbers. At the end of the day, your sine, cosine, or tangent is you're putting that function on an angle of some description, and you're getting a number. So these functions ultimately are applied to angles, things that represent angles, and the whole function, the output of that function, is a number. Now, sine or inverse sine or inverse cosine or inverse tangent, remember it's an inverse function. So inverse sine is the inverse function of sine. So what does that mean? So I guess if we think about it conceptually, what that means is if you have some number a and you put it through sine, right? You put it through the function, it will spit out b. So for example, this is sine. So if we put 30 degrees as an example, or pi over 6 if you're doing it in radian, then it's going to spit out a half. That's what the function does. But what an inverse function does is it takes the output b, you put it into a function, some sort of function, and it's going to give you what you started with. And this, for example, is inverse sine, and that's what the inverse function does. So if you are aware that sine takes a number or an angle and if it takes an angle and converts it into a number, that necessarily means that inverse sine takes a number and turns it into an angle, which therefore means sine inverse of some number is an angle. So sine of an angle is a number. But sine inverse will be the inverse sine of a number represents an angle. So just like sine of 30 is equivalent to a half, and I can think of that entire thing as just a number meaning a half, I can think of sine inverse of a half as just representing, well, 30 degrees or pi over 6. It is just an angle. Now, how does that apply to our question? We were trying to take the sine of a sine inverse x minus cos inverse x. This thing, I can think of it because it is just an angle. It's just alpha. Similarly, this here, cos inverse, by the same token, same idea, is also just an angle. It's sine of beta. So if I I think of it that way or I can write it out formally, but basically the left-hand side is sine of some alpha minus beta. And with that in mind, you can then proceed, right? Because sine of alpha minus beta, we should know how to deal with that. That's just a compound angle formula, which is sine cos sine. right? This is your double angle formula, and you expand it. And now let's look at this, right? You want to work out the sine of alpha, which is sine inverse x. Well, sine of sine inverse x is going to just be x, right? That one's cos of cos inverse x is just going to be x. Those are pretty straightforward. But the other two might not be so much so, and that might warrant a little bit more attention. Okay, so let's maybe draw a little bit here on this page. So sine of sine inverse x, I mean, as we said, that's just x. Cos of cos inverse x is just x, so that's just x squared minus, all right, sine inverse x is alpha. Now, what is alpha? Well, alpha was sine inverse of x. So I guess if this is alpha, right, it's some angle, which we're told in the question we assume to be acute. So if sine inverse of x is an acute angle, it represents the angle such that sine of alpha equals x. That's what it means. But if sine of alpha equals x, then I guess we can think of that as x over 1, because it's opposite over hypotenuse. And using Pythagoras, we can quite easily get that to 1 minus x squared. And so with that in mind, we can work out the cosine of alpha, which is sine inverse x. And the cosine will just be adjacent over hypotenuse. So that is just going to be the square root of 1 minus x squared. We'll repeat the same thing with beta. So beta is the angle such that the cosine is x. So that means this is x and 1, meaning this is square root of 1 minus x squared. That gives us, for an acute angle, the cosine of beta equals x. And then if we want the sine of that angle, then it's going to again be the square root of 1 minus x squared over 1. And then that means I'm going to have x squared minus 1 minus x squared, which is 2x squared minus 1. It's right-hand side. And that's how you do that question.